Hey everyone, it's Dr. Scott and I have some advice about writing introductions. First piece of advice I want to share with you is that you should wait maybe to write your introduction. Maybe don't begin with that as the first thing that you write. An introduction typically sets up the rest of the paper. You set the mood, the vibe, if you will. You get people emotionally invested in the topic. And if you don't really know where your essay is going, then it's hard to kind of set it up. So wait until you're pretty confident about where the essay is going before you write that introduction. Just a little tip from me to you. A paper's introduction, however, is a place where you can do something a little bit different. It's an opportunity to do something maybe even a little bit weird. In the introduction, you set up your paper's argument, but it's also a place where you can, again, do things that are just a little bit more creative. When I was a graduate student at New Mexico State University, I taught classes there as well as a graduate student, and I taught students that would come up from Ciudad Juarez in Mexico to attend classes at New Mexico State University. It was about a 40-minute drive from the U.S.-Mexico border. Those students that I taught, many of them were concerned about drug violence in northern Mexico and in Juarez, Mexico. Drugs would go across the U.S.-Mexico border with Texas into El Paso, Texas, and then up through the United States. And there was a lot of violence in Juarez and other Mexican border towns. A student wanted to write about this issue in the class that I taught at New Mexico State University, and she wanted to write about the role of addiction and drugs in the United States as it impacted Mexico. So what I want to do is walk you through some of the options that student might have had, and I'll talk a little bit about the option that she ended up picking. And you can use some of these options for the introductions that you need to write for your documented argument. One tried and true method for setting up an introduction is to use what's called the inverted pyramid method. So the inverted pyramid, if we have here we have a pyramid, we invert it, go like this. The top is broad. So you're starting a little bit broader with your topic, and then you narrow in and you get a little bit more focused until you're at the end and you've got your very specific topic and your thesis statement about that topic at the very end of that inverted pyramid. So with an inverted pyramid, you might do something like introduce statistics about a broader topic. So if we're talking about my student at New Mexico State University and the project that she was working on, she might provide some statistics about addiction in the United States. Pretty broad, still relevant to what it is she wants to write about, but then she would go from there to talking about how is Texas specifically affected by illegal drugs, and talking about addiction and providing some addiction statistics for Texas, and then getting into El Paso and El Paso County, where she focused her topic. El Paso is maybe 30 minutes away from Las Cruces, New Mexico, where she was attending school at New Mexico State University. So starting broad and getting narrower. She ended up with an argument, I believe it was something like using tax revenue from decriminalized drugs in El Paso County to fund addiction treatment. So starting with addiction broadly and then focusing in down into her very specific topic. If you're building an argument about a topic readers may not understand, this second approach, the definition approach, could be something that's really helpful. So you want to use an introduction to define key terms or to define something that is contested, that people don't agree on the definition of something. And as long as that definition is central and really important to your topic, the introduction is a great place to do that. You want to be really careful here, though. If you're defining a term because you think this is the easy route and you just grab Webster's dictionary and you just spend a few sentences, be careful here. It gets over on some faculty. It doesn't get over on me. If the student at New Mexico State University took up a paragraph saying, I'm going to define drugs, I know what drugs are. I'm good. If I'm the audience. So you think about what the audience needs. Sometimes using Webster's dictionary and defining something that people kind of understand, it's seen as filler and it's seen as kind of like just trying to get the word count, and that doesn't usually bode well for you. So avoid that approach if you can. But if you legitimately need to define some terms, if there's a term that's really important that people debate in your documented argument, the introduction is a great place to do that. In the context of the documented argument that my student at New Mexico State University put together, the project that she worked on, she could have defined decriminalization, she could have defined drug courts. Those were terms, though, the people that she was arguing for, or arguing to, they already understood those terms, so she did not use a definition approach for her documented argument like project at New Mexico State. Third option is to talk about the cause of something. If your paper is providing a solution to a problem, you might want to use your introduction to explain and explore what the cause is behind that problem that you're trying to solve. So this might involve providing a little bit of context, maybe a little bit of history, but you should only choose enough background and enough context that it takes for your readers to understand your paper's argument and your paper's topic. So if your audience already has a pretty good understanding of the context and the causes of the problem that you're trying to solve, this approach may not be all that helpful. Providing some context about the causes of the drug problem in northern Mexico was not something that she needed to persuade community leaders in El Paso, Texas about, so she did not take this approach either, but it could be helpful for your project. Your fourth option is to tell a story, in what we call an anecdote, that illustrates the problem or the issue that you're writing about for your documented argument. So again, the introduction is one of those places where you might be a little bit more creative, and you could provide an anecdote or tell a story about someone or some place that's been impacted by your paper's topic. It might be your own experience. It might be the experience of someone who has been reported on in newspapers and in magazines. That anecdote can retell their story. If you do that, you want to make sure that you attribute where this information comes from, that you kind of cite your sources. So if there's a newspaper article that you're drawing your anecdote from, you want to make sure that that is cited in your paper so that your readers know where that information comes from. You could also be a little bit more creative here and tell the story of your topic's impact. You can employ writing approaches typically found in creative writing, making sure that you're using the 5 senses, making sure that you're using visual details, auditory, things that we can hear, taste, smell, things like that. You can integrate those into an introduction. Again, the intro is a place where you can be pretty creative. That is ultimately what my student at New Mexico State University ended up doing. She described her daily commute from Juarez to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and she described the beautiful community that she lived in northern Mexico outside Juarez, and she just kind of described her commute as she was working her way towards the U.S.-Mexico border to cross the border into Texas, in El Paso, Texas, and then she would get on the freeway to drive up to Las Cruces. And she described how things got a little bit more violent. Evidence of that violence became much more visible as she approached the border. It was really effective. Point is that she was thinking about her audience and what they needed. She felt that people living in El Paso, Texas were kind of forgetting about what the drug trade was doing to Juarez. El Paso is a very safe community, even with all the drug violence across the border, but she wanted folks to remember that Juarez was definitely impacted by the drug trade, so she wanted to describe that violence. And she also wanted folks to remember that their neighbors, that El Paso's neighbors down in Juarez, Mexico, that they lived in normal communities, in beautiful communities, and she didn't want folks to lose sight of that. It's just a little bit of an aside. As somebody that's lived in southern New Mexico and along the U.S.-Mexico border in California, there is definitely some violence as a result of the drug trade. There's no ignoring that. But there's also some very beautiful communities there in Mexico, and I've had a pleasure visiting them when I lived out there. So the point I want to make here with introductions is that you really focus on what works for your audience, whether you use the narrative, the anecdote, the story kind of approach, whether you use the inverted pyramid or the definition, the cause, whatever approach that you take. You think about what your audience needs. You think about what your audience knows about the topic and where you want them to be emotionally wise, where you want them to be by the time that they end that introduction, those first 1 or 2 paragraphs of your essay. The introduction is an excellent place to hook your readers. Here that talked about it, by students, they want to hook their readers. But you really kind of need to think about what readers need and what expectations they have coming into They learn about a topic. What do you think that their expectations are? You're kind of setting up the mood, taking them from those expectations into your argument, your thesis statement within that introduction. What's the journey that you want them to take? And you pick the approach that's going to work best. So you need to move them from that broader conversation, what they know, and bring them into the topic and the focus topic that you're going to put together for your documented argument. I'll cover thesis statements in another video, but for the introduction, what you're going to do for your discussion board post today, you'll also include a thesis statement with this, but you're going to write an introduction. You're going to choose one of the approaches that I've talked about today and write an introduction to your documented argument. It should be 1 to 2 paragraphs in length. It should set up your paper's topic and your argument, and it transitions from your broader overview, your definition, your story or anecdote, to your paper's specific topic and its argument, its thesis statement. So you need to be able to make that transition in this introduction that you're going to write. If you're stuck and you're not sure what approach might work for your topic and your audience, make sure you reach out to your faculty member for their input. Keep up the good work, and I'll talk to you all soon.